So good afternoon, guys. So today is welcome to the Industry Connect, and the whole idea about Industry Connect is to create a platform, an ecosystem where the aspiring product managers can get in touch with the who is a product industry. Okay, we are very fortunate today. We have Satish Girugu. He is basically the Chief Operating Officer of Mediasys, which is India's largest healthcare administration organization, right? And what he does there in Mediasys is leveraging the technology to create better healthcare solutions for the families, right? Indian families. Prior to that, he was working in Redbus, and he is instrumental in defining and engineering the product, which is the redbus.in, which is the largest online transactive websites in the whole India itself, right? And it was quite a bit entrepreneurial experience he has, and prior to that, he was working in Photon Infotech as a AVP, and prior to that, he was working in SAP Lab as a development architect. So IIT Chennai graduate, 1998 batch, and his passion is creating awesome products and building high energy teams and solving problems, complex problems, splitting into small parts and finding a solution for that, and creating robust processes. It's all about Satish. So big round of applause. Please welcome Satish on the stage. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I don't think I did everything that you said, but yeah. Am I audible? Is this better? No? Is this better now? Yeah. Okay. All right. Good evening. Sorry, on a Saturday evening at 4:30. Is it better or? It's not working? Okay. The classic bugs, right? Yeah, it is switched on. All right, right? So when you switch on, stuff works. So good evening. Sorry to keep you on a Saturday evening at 4:30. I'll try and keep this as short as I can and leave most of it for questions. So, like Jagan said, thank you for the warm welcome. I work for a company called Mediasys. Most of us don't know, and hopefully you will know more about it in a year's time, right? So I run operations and technology for a 2,500 people company. So my day job revolves around right from a claims processing to hiring people to running operations to figuring out facilities and running technology, right? So that's basically what I do at Mediasys. Before I joined Mediasys, I was at Redbus. I was the CTO at Redbus, and then I had to get off the bus someday, right, in 2013. Prior to that, I was at SAP, and I got into SAP because SAP acquired the other company that I used to work for. So I used to head technology at a rule engine company, right, when business rule engines were like the latest fad then, between 2003 and 2007. So I built rule engines. I was heading an architecture and research group, a fancy title. Then we got acquired by SAP in 2007, right? And prior to that, I worked for a CAD/CAM company and built some products. Yeah, it's been about 17 years at least since I've started, working, right? So when at least Jagan said, Industry Connect, and I've been out of the startup space now for a year and a half. But I think startup is more a state of mind, right? Startup is not really the size of the company. Right? Just like product management is more about a philosophy than a person, right? I thought I was happy to just come back and at least share a couple of experiences, at least that I had along the way, and see if any of them are useful to anyone here. If not, you don't have to give me coffee, right? So that's it's a free coffee thing. So I tried keeping the slides to as small as possible, and largely based on experiences, and I would really like to, talk through, some of the examples of the experiences. And feel free to stop me anytime if you have questions, right? It is not meant to be a session where all questions are at the end, right? So click on this here. This one? Yeah. So I'm not a great tech guy, right? So I've switched to ops now, right? So this we've talked, so this is fine. So product management, I'm officially not qualified to talk about product management because I've never been a product manager, right? I've never been a product manager. But if For me, product management is largely an art still, right? It is not science. We try and break it down into science, much like the appraisal process, right? Every year. Finally, appraisal is a subjective process. Either I like you or I don't like you, right? But you have to make it objective. So you make 1,000 questions and put a weighted average on each of them and make it look like, hey, it's a very objective process, right? But having said that, what makes the difference in a good appraisal versus a bad appraisal is the person who's actually doing the appraisal, right? It's the thought process that is going behind in talking about the appraisal in terms of your own interest in growing the other person's career, right? Giving constructive feedback, etc. So similarly, I think product management is much an art. In a lot of ways, it's all about managing trade-offs and conflicts, right? I think that's pretty much defines your 24/7 job. And what are these trade-offs? You have to create value for the consumer. You have to create value for the business. You still have to make money, right? Not everybody can be an Instagram, right? There are many other people who actually need to have real products and real sales to get value, right? And value for the team, because no team is going to continue to work for you if they don't see value in it for them. Not just in terms of monetary value. You get a rock star product manager or a rock star engineer, and finally you say let's build a form for somebody to do Keen. He's going to leave you in a couple of months, right? The team also needs that motivation, the challenge, right? There has to be some material improvement even for the team, right? And often as a product manager you end up taking only the consumer's view because that's all that matters finally, right? And then you can see this huge divide growing between the product management and engineering. Then it's also about managing a lot of conflicts. While conflict may be a very heavy term, it's not that people are fighting with each other all the time. I want to ship a lot of features, right? Versus let me take my time and build one feature at a time, right? I mean, it is a conflict at the end of the day. I want it fast versus I want it awesome, right? I mean, there's a difference. And awesome does not happen overnight, right? It's very hard. I want to ship features versus I want to spend time building the right architecture for the product so I can actually build more features better, right? And consumer wants this feature, one more discount, one more pop-up, one more complex shipping option. And here at the back end, the ops is saying, I have no idea what the customer just bought, right? And I'm still supposed to ship. And trust me, most startup companies for the first 3 years do manual balance sheets only because they have no software. They have never looked at the accounting as an important piece of building the product. And I did that at Redbus as well. At the end of the year, you take the entire transaction dump, figure out who needs to be paid how much, right? I mean, it's not a very pleasant experience. But the product management, in a lot of ways, all of us, with or without the title, take the responsibility saying, here I am, my job revolves around managing this so that everybody else can actually channelize all of their efforts towards one solid product, right? Otherwise, everybody in the organization is going to go run in a different direction, right? The engineering guy is focused on architecture, user experiences guy is building fancy UI that nobody can implement, right? And the sales guy is selling something that you can never implement, right? So I think, so that's all about product management. Now, what is it that I want to convey? It is, the most important thing is focus, right? And most important thing is focus. And focus does not mean that you shut yourself in a room and then keep looking at the same product, right, all the time. Focus, I don't know if you watched Kung Fu Panda, right? That's all about focus, right? It's all about focus. It does not mean that you can't eat or you can't do anything else. You must be wedded to that objective, right? And that's focus. Now, the easiest way to define a focus is what's most valuable to the consumer, right? At some point, all of us get into this, I need to do more, right? And do more typically we translate into a lot more features, right? Every day we need to launch a feature. Every morning we must send out a communication saying, hey, now you got this awesome, now your star ratings are in orange in color, not in red, right? I mean, that's a feature. And then there is a product manager who's looking at Google Analytics and trying to figure out, has this increased conversion, right? Let's run an A/B test, multivariant test. All of us are stuck towards, let me create more, right? And pretty much engineering guys are writing a lot more code, right? Product guys are defining a lot more features. Everybody is trying to do a lot more at a breakneck pace because you don't know what works with the customer. Finally, you don't know if your startup is going to grow beyond the first year, right? And the assumption is that if you put out 10,000 things, one of them will work, right? Much like this project management software, right? Slack, right? Slack came about. I forgot the name of the original company that they were. They were doing lots of stuff that was not going anywhere. And finally, one of the internal tools that they had built to manage their project, they went and convinced the investor, saying, we think there is value. And then somebody actually saw value. That's what is now Slack, a couple of $1 billion company. It is also not that every idea that you start with is what you end up with, right? So often we end up doing, no, let's put these 10,000 things on a buffet. Some investor will pick something and then that will be valuable, right? But see, somewhere we are also in it not just for the valuation, right? We are also in it because we're trying to solve a problem. We are trying to solve a problem. And there is enough research. People have left their jobs, right? And not taking salaries. People have spent time trying to define what that problem is, right? So stay focused, right? It is very easy to digress, right? It's very eagerness to, in that eagerness to ship a lot more. So somewhere I think this is the fundamental question, right? Is this valuable for the consumer? And it is done everywhere else. Only in software and products because it is very intangible, right? And we keep experimenting. Like some of you at least have heard and read about the lean manufacturing, right? It is the difference between how Ford was developing their assembly line versus how Toyota was doing their assembly line, right? Ford believed in doing lots of things. Somebody will build lots of tires. Somebody will build lots of steering wheels. Somebody will build lots of panels. At some point, they'll all come together and become cars. Then Toyota took exactly the other way and saying, when somebody says, I want a car, I will produce a tire, I will produce a steering wheel, then I will bring. I'm more focused on the end result and not on just producing these incremental pieces, right? It is common sense, right? You don't, in the morning, get up and make a lot of sabzi, somebody, a lot of sambar, somebody, right? You need to know how many people are coming for a meal. Beyond a point, and you have to know that basic input, right? And we've done that world over in production, we've done that in assembly line. Nobody produces raw material, indiscriminately. But if you apply that balance to how we produce software, there is, for every line of useful code, probably there are 10 lines of useless code that we are just producing in the hope that it will work someday, right? So I think it is important to stay focused on what's valuable to the consumer, and somebody must keep defining, is this valuable, is it not valuable? It sounds very stupid, others might feel insulted, but somebody has to do that, right? Without that focus, your consumer is actually lost beyond your version 2, version 3, because you don't know what you are finally, right? And somewhere you have to say no, right? And that's the hardest part, especially in this country where we don't say no, right? We, depending on how vigorously you nod head and which direction you start and which direction you end, it could mean a no. It could mean I will do it, but 6 months later, right? Or I don't want to do it. The important thing is, sorry. Yeah, please.
Moving on to the first slide, we
Yeah.
spoke on the product architecture and the future for the future side. And here we talk about the time to the market and the critical features. Like most of the time when we work on the products or the solution, we end up in confusion like whether we need to think of the right product architecture which might take a long time to have in place or something which is already built, we try to push the feature sets based on the market need. So there are two things, like for a startup we might think in a different way, for established product or the proven product we might think in different ways. Like example, in case if your organization want to work on a wellness program or a population health management product, what approach you take based on your existing technology available?
See, I think often, I don't have a good answer because it's very contextual, right? So I can't guess your context. But often I think it is about how you define the problem, right? A lot of times it's about defining the problem. If you have started at a 50,000 feet level saying, should I take this approach versus this approach? I don't think it will work, right? You'll have to bring it down all the way to the ground level saying, right now my customer, here is my proposition to my consumer, right? Here are the 10 pain points for my customer. Now you have two choices, right? If I don't fix the pain points, there is a competition. Unless you're so early that there is no competition, right? Or my consumer is at a stable level and 80% of my customers will preferably wait for something solid versus something urgent. This is only you will know, right? Because you know your consumer, you know your product, right? The choice will finally then boil down to applying that in the context, right? And often we get bogged down because we've defined the problem to be a much higher level problem. You actually bring it down to a lower level problem and saying, should I go depth versus breadth, right? That's largely the question. Depth versus breadth is not a generic question. Depth versus breadth is a feature by feature question, value by value question. And I think that is where I have a couple of more slides. If you can just hold your thought, and if I'm still not able to articulate, I'll come back and take that, right? So, and on the focus, this is about having a gatekeeper, right? And somebody has to be that gatekeeper, otherwise all of us will keep running, in different directions. And at some point you have to decide, right? Are you running after time to market? Are you running after a feature set or a stable evolution? And again, that's contextual. You're building an enterprise product. Let's take an SAP. I was at SAP, right? SAP NetWeaver is a platform on which SAP products are built. By the way, the Java rule engine there is what we have built in the SAP NetWeaver platform. SAP NetWeaver had a release cycle of 18 months. 18 months from one release to the next release. 6-month planning, 6-month development, 6-month validation, ramp up pilot before they actually go to a customer. And this was way back in 2008. So IBM is the largest system integrator for SAP, right? IBM does a lot of the SAP implementation projects. And IBM was running an internal SAP upgrade project because IBM also runs on SAP, right? And 100 plus countries, different taxations, different timesheets, different complexity. Of course, SAP does it exceptionally well, and that's why these large enterprises are there. IBM's own internal upgrade project was a 4-5 year project, right? And IBM is the largest SI, right? They have the deepest of the expertise on SAP. But it is not one area where you won't say, let's upgrade SAP tomorrow, right? And then half your regulators will shut you down. So there is a context for the decision that you make. Often we forget the context and we try to make the decision in isolation, right? It is like when somebody came to Redbus and said, hey, you got a booking engine, you got the ability to plug into inventory, you got the ability to do real-time bookings, and get great consumer experience and lots of user base. Why don't you start doing flights and hotels and everything else? I know they do now, but not when I was there, right? So, and we have to take a call as a business saying, what am I doing, right? What is the problem that I'm trying to solve, right? Do I digress and add hotels where I don't know nothing about hotels, where I don't know how inventory works, right? If that sambar has less salt also is an escalation, right? I mean, you have to be prepared. It is not about, I have an idea, let me add a new feature tomorrow. Because your consumer service, your call center, your operations, your finance, your engineering, everybody has to be able to live and breathe that domain. You can't say, but in bus this happens, right? If the hotel escalation comes, because that's never an answer for your customer. So somewhere there, no does not mean that you just keep saying no to everything else, right? No is a qualified no, right? And stay focused. And this is important because if it is a time to market, 90% of the time, unless you got awesome developers, whatever you build will be a throwaway stuff. It will be a prototype. And we know that there are enough startups whose products have evolved from only prototypes and they still remain like prototype in quality, right? Because you will never get the time to really replace it, right? Then the product manager will come back and say, the customer is paying money here, right? I can't afford you to take a 6 months break and then redo the same platform. Because when you redo, you're still at the same level. Yeah, it's like in F1, right? You go into the pits, you come back, and if you actually drop 2 places, then it's the saddest feeling, right? And you just happened a couple of weeks ago. So it is important because if you're building throwaway stuff, please be cognizant you're building throwaway stuff, right? Make no bones about it being this is the world's best product. If you're building a prototype, it's a prototype. Be honest, right? Be honest to what you deliver, because if you're not, the moment it scales from 100 people to 200 people or 1,000 people, it's going to crash, right? I'm not proud of saying this, but back in 2011, Redbus used to crash at least once a week. At least once a week. On all peak day bookings, which is one day before the holidays, right? We used to have downtimes. Because unlike a warehouse-based catalog thing, like let's say you build an e-commerce product where you own the catalog. Somebody comes and places an order, you're only taking the order into your system, right? You're not acting on it immediately. Acting on the order happens in a different system at a different point in time, right? Then you go buy the product and ship it. In Redbus, every operator was a live integration. There were 1,000 operators, right? And every operator system was directly integrated into Redbus. So when you did a search results and opened the seat layout to see which seats are available in a bus, that was a live call to the operator. And for every operator, for every seat layout, it was more than 3 minutes old. But otherwise, we'll end up selling you a sold seat, right? It will show it is available. And then operator systems couldn't take the scale and the rapid increase in the volume. We had our own challenges because all the systems were very tightly coupled. So you can visualize this, right? I click a button, it goes to the front-end server, goes to the inventory server goes to the operator, goes to the database, and I'm just holding this. There's nothing that is decoupled, right? 100 people come, how many connections will you hold? How many connections will the operator hold? And if it is the top 10 operator who is anyway in demand, if that operator goes down, we'll take your entire system down, right? So all of this, it's very easy when you build a system for 1,000 users or 2,000 users, right? But the moment there's an order of magnitude increase in scale, trust me, none of your systems will work unless you've thought about ways and means to improve, right? You can't today, on day one, you can't build for 1 million users because you don't even know if you're going to make money tomorrow, right? But the point is, you at least have to have thought about how you will deal with it. You have to have a plan, right? Like our Whitefield roads, I live there, right? If somebody has left some space but not made the road, it's okay, right? So I try and come out of Whitefield every morning, right? Which is
telling that how that problem was solved after scaling?
Yeah, so we had to do a bunch of things, right? One, we decided we'll only be cloud-only company. We are nothing other than developers' desktops in the office. Everything else is in Amazon, right? Everything. Right from your source code control system to staging to pre-production, production, everything was on Amazon. Then we went about decoupling the components and said, can each of them independently scale? Can the front end scale? At some point we came to a point where there was more traffic. It took us one right click to double the front end servers. So we built our own tools. Because Amazon didn't have the tool set when we did. So we actually built our own internal tools that monitored load, that monitored this thing, and there was an auto scaling. Daytime you run 12 instances, nighttime it will become 2, and morning it will come back to 12, right? So a whole lot of those, one is the decoupling, and second is building that insulation from the operator, ability to cut them off, and take some pragmatic calls on how real time you want to be. That's a decision. You have to choose, right? See, this is not an embedded systems, where is it? Yeah, here, right? So it's not an embedded systems problem, where real time is really real time, right? You have to know, you have to keep bringing down that bar where you have an acceptable level of failures. But as product manager, we say you cannot have a single failure, right? But it doesn't work like that. Because when you're at a 90% quality, a 91, 92, every incremental percentage of quality comes at a prohibitively high cost. That's a trade-off, right? It's a trade-off. You can't get quality for free. You have to choose what level of quality you want to operate at. It might sound weird. Customer will never like to hear this. But the point is, you can't afford 100%. Unless you have the funds, you have everything else in place, right? Even Six Sigma is Six Sigma. It's not an infinite sigma, right? I mean, it is a number that you have to choose. Right? And all of this largely falls under focus, right? Who is my consumer? What does he or she want? What am I delivering? Am I focused on creating valuable stuff, or am I creating lots of digressions for the consumer? Am I using my available resources, which is the number of engineering hours, number of finance hours that I have? Am I using it well? Am I not using it well? Am I putting that towards the right direction? Like, I think you've just done the agile stuff, right? Are you building the most valuable thing right now? It's not just for software, right? I mean, agile is for what you deliver. And software happens to be a core part of what you deliver these days. But software is not the only thing. Finally, you built this awesome software, customer calls the call center and says, please don't call me. Then it's not going to be a great consumer experience. The experience is a well-rounded experience where the software must do the bulk of the heavy lifting because you can't afford otherwise. But that's not the only thing. So every time, which means if you have limited finances, at some point you have to make a decision, would I build a new feature in my software or would I improve my call center infrastructure? I mean, somebody has to make that decision, right? That will come when you are focused on what's important to your customer. Otherwise, it will not come, right? And I'm not advocating anything, but I'm just saying that one of the couple of ways that will help you do is the most important thing in a team in that's building this great products is the team, right? And often we forget the people. We give more emphasis to a nameless, faceless customer, but customer needs this. You've never even seen, you've not even gone out to meet the customer, right? It's all your illusionary customer that sits in your head because you decided that you are the alter ego of your customer, right? And then you decided that you know everything about the customer. And then suddenly it becomes like what Satish says is what customer says. But clearly no, I have a disconnect because from the time I did my last research, last 6 months I've been sitting in the office 24/7, right? The world has moved on, the world has changed. So somewhere if you're not aligning the team and if the whole team does not understand the problem, right, in the same way, and I have seen this personally in every company that is, right? Product manager comes and says, "Arey, isko yahan se wahan pe karo," right? Some button, he'll want to move from left to right. Some button will be square, you want to change it to red and green and, because everybody's is a trial and error. Then you don't know what will improve conversion because conversion largely is an art. If you have a glitch-free website, conversion is an art, right? It is not really too much of a science. To make it science, we run experiments, right? We prove a number and then say, now bus will face this side, not that side. We did that. On the home page, there is a reason why the bus was facing this side. Because we proved that bus facing this side, it gave us better conversions. Right? No market research. It's you can go to one of the engineers and says, "Aaj night out karo, tomorrow morning I want to see the A/B test," right? That's market research. So because Google makes it easy to do market research, which is a proxy research. No, I'm not taking anything away. I'm just trying to say that it is important to stay connected with the customer, right? So at Redbus, the leadership team would go stand at the bus stops every Friday. Hey, you go stand at the bus stop. Because that's the truth of the matter, right? I mean, that is what matters to you. You go stand at the bus stop, ask the customer, somebody will give you a slap, somebody will shout at you, but the point is, otherwise you're building a pseudo product for a pseudo customer. Right?
How often? Every Friday?
Look, I think in the initial though, every day there was somebody, right? And beyond a point, unfortunately, every company loses the customer connect, right? Then you delegate, but then last case, kal jayenge na. That's what happens. But the point is, no, but we did this very religiously. And as a company travel policy, unless a travel required more than 12 hours, no flights were allowed. So that forced people to take buses, that forced people to wait at the boarding points, right? That forced people to figure out how to reach the boarding point because the boarding point will say Bangalore, right? And of course, where in Bangalore will you go and board the bus? So, but the point is, the engineering guy will never feel the pain because it's not his or her job, right? You hired him to develop software. The ops guy is there to develop software and to run operations. But if all of us have not understood what is important for that consumer, none of us will do the right thing. For the customer, it will always feel like, today you asked me to do this, tomorrow you are asking me to do this, right? And there is no stability in the thought process. And engineering, despite what most of us in this room would like to think, is not an assembly line function, it's a creative function. Right? It is not where you feed a spec and you get code out, right? It just does not work like that because I've been on the other side as well, right? But it is important, let's take it this way, right? Do you go to a media agency and say, tomorrow morning I want to run a creative? Why don't you do that? Because in your mind it's a creative job. It takes time. Somebody has to sit, think, shut themselves in a black room, right? Dark room. But when it comes to an engineering guy or an ops guy, I need this now. In the next half an hour, I need this going live in the website, right? That guy will finally do. But what he has done, what assumptions he has made, what repercussions it has on the other features, right? What impact it has on the other plans. That conversation has never happened, right? So it now goes back to that focus, right? It is about, curbing your enthusiasm, right? Curb your enthusiasm. If you don't streamline what each of these people contribute to in a product, it will become too many random things, right? Before you know, 6 months later, everybody is struggling hard to figure out, why did I build that feature like that? Because somebody said build it, so somebody built it, right? What was asked, what was built, what is documented is very, very different, right? We used to, at least in Redbuzz, in the initial days, I used to have a favorite term called feature discovery. So I would go discover a feature, right? Because often you open up so many avenues for the customer to interact with, do so many things that people sort of lose track, right? But it gets better, even though the randomness is required from the business and the environment, if the whole team understands what problem you're trying to solve. So often when we go and talk to an engineer, we talk like engineer does not have to or does not understand the customer. Let me give you the spec. But we've never had that conversation like this. A company-wide conversation saying, here is the real world scenario, right? This is the problem that we are trying to solve. Because if you don't have a frame of reference for what you do, it doesn't matter which function you're in, you will never get it right. Okay? You will never ever get it right. So aligning the team is not just about doing a lot of meetings, right? It is about ensuring that irrespective of the job title or the function, everybody understands the consumer. Then it becomes an informed decision where the engineering guy is able to say, I understand this is important for your consumer. These 3 things I can do with what I have today. These 7 things for me to do, I need to re-architect or change the design. But then you assign a value and say which is the more valuable thing to do, right? But this conversation typically never happens because everybody is in a rush to hand over a job to somebody else, right? All of us are handing out jobs to the others, right? So, which is why these stand-ups, right? It's not just for the software guy, right? The stand-up ideally is for every function. The stand-up is ideally for everyone on that project. So if you have an ops guy, you are a call center guy, you are a finance guy, you need to make sure that everybody is at the table. Right? Otherwise there is no buy-in. People will look at product manager as a guy who is running wild experiments, trial and error, hit and miss, right? If it is successful, product manager will say yes. If it is successful, no, we've never run that experiment, right? But it's important to align the team. I have seen enough instances where the trust between product management, the new product guy and the new engineering guy breaks down in less than 24 hours. Once that breaks down, you can't re-establish it very easily. It is not about, he is not working for you. Both of you are working for the consumer. If you don't give that sense to the rest of the people, it becomes very hard because there is no ownership, right? This is basically how, right, some working model. Ideas come every day, right? Dime a dozen, especially in startups, we're all about ideating. Because we have no money, no sales, right? We sit and ideate a lot of time, right? So, and how do you curate these ideas? Suddenly, like flights, right? From tomorrow we'll launch flights. Who's responsible for curating the ideas, right? Who's responsible for... Who's responsible for making sure that the ideas are not wild, right? I mean, we don't want to do all of that. And how are you distinguishing? Think of this as 3 buckets, right? The first bucket, every idea goes into a bucket and somebody is weeding out the bad ones. And there's a bucket where you say this is a manageable incremental upgrade that I want to do to a product. Then somebody has to detail it out. Then from there, somebody has to take the meaningful subset and put it into an implementation plan, right? Because you can't go to an engineering guy unless you know what you want, right? That's the truth. But often we go to them before we know what we want, because in our minds it's very easy to change. Ye karke dikhao, right? I don't like it, change this, right? But it costs, because these are expensive guys, right? If you don't look at it, engineering guys are taken for granted kinds. If you have 40 engineering hours available to you every week. Of course, everybody works 100, right? But you have 40 engineering hours available to you every week from each person at a certain cost. Do you want this guy to randomly run experiments and keep failing? Or would you want those engineering hours going into building something valuable for the consumer? A lot of these become intangible costs, right? Because the guy is sitting in front of you, he does not feel like a cost. I can tell him, right? He'll do a night out and finish it off. But it is a cost. If not anything else, it is an opportunity cost because you miss building something else. Right? So never go unless you know what you want. Because the problem with these guys is they don't say no. They will build it. Right? They won't tell you that the other thing that had to be launched tomorrow is not going to be done because you now asked me this, right? But you think it is such a small thing that he'll accommodate, right? Or the Bangalore will adjust, right? He will not adjust because he's a human being. He has only as many hours, right? So somewhere there, how do you curate ideas? What goes into product backlog? What gets? And please, this is, I think, a fundamental thing. What gets discussed versus what gets implemented. I think somewhere somebody has to draw a very solid line, not a thin line, and say, thank you for your inputs, great discussion, but here is what we are implementing. Right? Again, goes back to focus and staying true to what you're doing. And I think the other important attribute of a team is discipline. While we talk about agile, it's wonderful, right? If everybody did that, and there's no failure, or if there's a failure, you will fail so fast that the cost of failure is reduced, right? Fundamentally, these are the only two takeaways for me, right, from an agile model. Everybody says, every day morning 10:30 we'll do a stand-up, right? Now, first day, everybody will show up. Second day, 50%. It's like that. It's a geometric progression, but in the inverse direction, right? 100 becomes 50, becomes 25, becomes, I did a night out last night. You asked me to do something else. I left only at 3 in the morning. I prefer working in the evenings. I feel I'm more creative, right? But the point is, you can't be a team if there is not at least one thing that you can agree on, which is the amount of overlap that you have as a team. I have a very simple rule on my teams. I don't care when you come, when you go, provided the atomic team that you're working with, which is a 3-member, 4-member, has a minimum of 6-hour overlap in a day. I have no other constraints. So as long as you figure out with those 4 people, when you guys are there, when you guys are not there, by all means you come when you want, when you leave, when you go. I have no issues. But that discipline is what actually keeps the teams going. Because otherwise what happens is the product manager will come at 9, leave at 6. Engineering guy will learn at 6:15 and leave at 3:15 in the morning. You're not even talking to each other. How are you two working together in solving a customer's real pain point? So the discipline is the most underrated thing because, we're all creative, individual rock stars, right?
So how often do you leave the product manager on to deal with the entire thing and use the product, take it through the validation?
See, like I said, for me, product manager is one person who's taken that mantle, saying, if the product manager could be for a version, right? It need not even be for a product manager. It is a role that does all of this. And often enough, we've left many people on their own. But you have to have a review mechanism, right? Because then that one person becomes your single point of failure. That's the only risk that you run. And if it's like an Alok who I had the pleasure of working with, then you don't have to look at, right? But not everybody is an Alok at Redbus, right? So you have to go back. And again, see, we're all human beings at the end of the day, right? We have our own points to prove. We need success. We need to prove that we've done something. We've improved conversion, right? It's like the product manager is saying, there's 2 million app downloads. It's an awesome product that we've created. The engineering guy will say, dude, I've created something that 2 million people are able to use, right? I mean, there is never, as long as we are honest to solving the consumer's problem, we are not making it like me versus you. That's the hardest problem to solve, which is why it's fundamentally a people business. It is not a technology business. It is not, machines business, right? It is a people business. And those 3, 4, 5, 10 people agree that we will work together in this model according to this discipline. We realize that it is not democracy finally, because you don't want to be in these never-ending debates. You want to do something valuable. If you have a framework where somebody finally has to arbitrate, that's the product manager for me. Product manager will not prevent a discussion. The product manager will be the arbitrator finally when you have had as many discussions. right? So if I trust the product manager has the maturity, I have other things to do. Right? I clearly don't want to do his job. Right? And please remember what you hear as flexibility, agility, I can change this tomorrow. Often we confuse randomness and ad hoc with flexibility and agility, right? Ad hoc is not equal to agile. Agile also has a plan. It could be 1 week plan, it could be a 2 week plan, but there is a plan. There is a discipline by which the plan is created. And there's a discipline by which items are dropped off. And there's a discipline by which you hand over and say either this incremental effort is a failure or a success. But it is not ad hoc. It just looks ad hoc because you compress the delivery timelines to weeks as opposed to our month cycles, right? So just remember, just because we are agile, every morning you don't change your plan, right? I mean, there's some stability that is required. Okay, so now I think it's going into pontification, so I will stop and then go back into the other slides. By only tips, useful, not useful, I'm not indicating that none of you are doing this. Don't have a random delivery schedule, right? That goes back into discipline. People can't be disciplined if there is nothing predictable. If you are in a product where the consumer has to install or click a button to upgrade, just because you have lots of ideas, don't give him upgrade every day, right? Somewhere you have to be cognizant because you can't upgrade every day. Nobody upgrades. Fact of the matter is, unless you're one of those crazy Apple fans, nobody upgrades, right? And there's an affordability, like in case if you're building an enterprise product, an upgrade has statutory issues, regulatory issues, compliance issues, financial implications. You can't just keep upgrading. You can't just say that I can fix it, but you have to upgrade and you have to migrate your data. And that's the hardest thing to do for most customers, right? Don't force too many upgrades. And from a focus and discipline perspective, whatever is your core user experience. Now, user experience need not be software, right? It could be a call center experience, it could be voice experience, it could be a delivery experience. But there is a user experience that each of your products will have. I think one thing, in my personal opinion, is that you should build your core user experience and don't keep changing it every day. If a button is here, please keep it there. It is not about to find the button exercise every morning, right? I mean, you can't do that, right? There's somewhere that core user experience, because it's very confusing for people, right? When Office made a switch from 2003 to 2007, that was probably one of the boldest things that somebody like Microsoft actually did, right? Taking a chance that I will just go away from what you have. And it also took the longest time for upgrade, unlike the other versions. Why? Because all shortcuts have changed, all the formulas have changed. And if you've seen the core finance and accounting guys, their fingers move like magic on it, right? When they're working in Excel, you and I don't even know what they're doing. But people become advanced users as they keep using features. And advanced users, it's all muscle memory only finally, right? So don't keep changing your core user experience, right, very often. Yeah, so.
One question I have, regarding core user experience. So recently the debate is going on about this app only thing, or we are doing the mobile, Flipkart and Visa, they will only the app only thing, and people are debating over whether they should be in a platform or not. So what is your thoughts on that?
I think if you can't afford a full engineering team, build only one, right? But if you can afford, sorry. He said recently there's this whole trend of app only versus a browser only versus both, right? What is your view? I was just trying to say that if you can't afford a full engineering team, stick to one, right? But no, I think it's a choice, right? Facebook did that some time back, right? When they forced their developers to look at the app version. Myntra said, is there value? I don't know. Is there problems that Myntra can solve on app better that you cannot solve on the browser? I don't know, right? And let me take my example, right? We are in the insurance space. I have a patient who's at the hospital, submitted a request saying I want a cashless approval. The question then is, would an awesome looking app is what he needs? Is some way to get an instant status is what he needs. If I have defined the problem as I will deliver through the app, and in every one of my patients who goes to a hospital, and despite it being a planned process, nobody does planning upfront. 85% of the cashless requests that I get are when people have already walked into the hospital. If only you had told me a day earlier, and I would have had this ready, right? I don't have to invest in technology. I can still do my 4 hours delay, but I would have done it a day earlier. Then it is not a delay for you. But despite that, 85% people choose to just walk into hospital. No, it is not for an accident. It is for a cataract. One morning you don't decide and say, my father needs a cataract today, right? If you're getting a CAPG or if you're getting a heart surgery done, nobody wakes up in the morning and said, let me get a surgery done today, right? It does not work. But if you're fundamentally a consumer behavior, is that it is going to be a random walk-in and they need an instant response, then you have to go back and calibrate your decision against that reality. Right? So we said we will not build an app because I can't get a guy at the hospital, he is already angry that they have taken an hour. But he does not understand the complexity of doing the back-end work, right? Now I tell him, send him a link and saying, download app, register, sign in, he's going to kill me, right? So he said, no, we will not try and do that. We said we will build a simple mobile interface which is accessible on any browser. That was a very conscious choice. He said, I will not build an app. And it was a very conscious choice when building apps was the fact. This was less than a year ago. I personally took the call saying I will not build an app. I will give them a simple mobile interface that works on any browser, right from our good old Blackberries, where all you need to do is for your claim you will get the status. Right? Today, for every claim that comes into the system, there's at least one hit on that interface. Right? And my calls are not growing at the same proportion as the growth of transactions, right? For me, it's a validation that in my industry this works. Now after a year, my corporates are coming back and saying, this is fine, but it doesn't work if I don't have connectivity. There is nothing offline. Now I said, now you're talking, now let's go build an app, right? Well, I'll give you some offline data. I think you have to overlay that decision with your target audience, right? And unfortunately, I'm not working for Myntra, so I can't explain why they're doing only app.
That is the cost will be a more like if you are multiple platform or multiple devices, you are building the applications. I believe it is a native application you are building your.
Correct. No, initially we didn't build a native app. So I took this Jugaad, right? Indian Jugaad. I took one Android shell, put a browser, put the mobile website inside. And I launched the app. It took me 2 days. So my iPhone app is not a native app. My Android app is not a native app. My Windows app is not a native app. People said, I want app. I said, okay, I'll give you app. Right? There's a shell, there's a browser, and it opens a mobile website. Which is what, by the way, Make My Trip did for years.
So in that case, like the analytics part is very difficult to handle it, right?
No, again, what I'm saying is, for my industry, this is the choice that I have taken for my customer base. I am not in conversions. I'm not tracking conversions. I'm in self-help. I know who has used the self-help and who has not used the self-help. That much I know. Tomorrow when it goes to, I know digression, but when insurance is a pen and paper industry. Healthcare in India is a pen and paper. For most people, TPA is a fax machine, where you put a request and you get a response, right? But today, between the full claims, domiciliary claims, and the interactions that I have with hospitals, I process 2 million claims a year on paper, right? We answer 150,000 calls a month on our toll-free number. Now, the nature of the industry is wildly different from, let's say, a Myntra trying to convert customers and then explore interest and do cross-sell. At this point, I have no cross-sell intentions, right? I have no conversion intentions. So we said, what is the right way to go back? I don't know if it is right or not. Time will tell. But at least the way we've defined our technology is, first, what is the biggest thing? There's no transparency. Hospital does not trust TPA, does not trust insurer, does not trust broker, does not trust any two parties, don't trust anybody, right, in this industry. I hope I'm not on camera, but yeah, so right, but no, trust, I mean, it is not that mistrust, because there is no point of reference, right? Today when you see a book saying, this book costs you 3,000 rupees, what would you do? You go back and you're able to cross-reference, right? Then, if there's the same price, you buy from the guy who gives you better experience. If it is a lower price and all you want is a book and experience doesn't matter, you will go to a low price site. That's your decision making. If you want a weekend trip out of Bangalore, you will go to TripAdvisor. 3 stars means you will blindly close your eyes and book. You've never been there. The guy who's written the review, he's never even seen the face or talked. But somebody is given a 4-star, he booked. But for a healthcare transaction, when I'm going through a total knee replacement, let's say I've taken my mother for a TKR, right, total knee replacement for one knee. Hospital says it will cost you 1.8 lakhs. Then I check insurance covers, not covers, send request to TPA. TPA says I will give you only 1.3. Where is the difference? There is no difference, right?
When we talk about the user experience, certain of the time what I've seen is even the workflows within the hospital plays a major role in user experience.
No, it is correct.
So in your case, like I'm just going with your example, I'm just trying to share my thought. So we tell there is a mistrust between the products, like the hospital, like in case insurance. So is there a plan where you can bring out a transparency within the payment fee structure within each of the hospital? Like assume a consumer opts for an insurance claim and you have a statistics of 4 to 5 different hospitals and you share those numbers so that's one of the way of user experience when they get to know the amount. Like with the recent Obamacare that's been happening even in US, many of the hospitals are going to display these numbers public in the public sites.
Agree. I think, so I didn't want to make this about MediAssist, but I will very briefly answer that question, purely in terms of philosophy, not in terms of the specifics. We can do that outside the session. Hospital is not regulated in the country. That's the source of your expenditure, right? Insurance, which is the downstream activity, is regulated. Right? So I cannot enforce a hospital to publish. I can educate my customers based on my past data. Correct? So our basic thing is to use technology as a lever to build transparency. That was, we said, so we had a three-phase thing, right? We said first we'll only build transparency. How do we build transparency? I've taken out everything that was 1 day old. We built, there's a consumer interface on the desktop, on the mobile. There's an insurer interface. There is a hospital interface. And we said all of them will have real-time data. Whatever my person is doing today inside my system is what I will publish. Guaranteed to be not more than 3 to 4 minutes lag between somebody approving or somebody doing something to you actually seeing on your mobile. The status of the claim is not more than 4 minutes. And we knew we would get hammered in the initial months because transparency comes at a cost, right? But we went back and told every corporate, listen, you may get angry, I'm trying to be transparent. But everything you see is what is happening in my system. So I now have a hospital interface where 1,700 of the 5,000 hospitals are on that interface, where we try and convert faxes into electronic interactions. Then I have a consumer interface, which is through mobile and portal. And by the way, our consumer, in terms of the number of individuals that we service, is 12 million, right, on the corporate side. So went back to each corporate and said, please take this interface, you don't have to call me. It is real time, right? So we upgraded telephony, we upgraded voice and said, build transparency. Then we said, how do you next take this to a self-help? Transparent is not enough. Can I get the customer to not have to call me, but still have the data pushed, right, in real time? So we still sort of at the latter part of the self-help thing that we are doing. I think then in my world comes the experience. Then the experience, right? When I know the data is there, when it is pushed to me, then how well is my person interacting with you? How informative is the data point that I have pushed to you? How well you can use this to make your future decisions, etc. That's more the experience, right? A lot of that today, see, unless people have a culture of planning, me pushing planning data to them on priority 1 does not give me or the customer any benefits. If customers are moving towards planned hospitalization, then the data points and comparison, and how do I help you plan better, actually then becomes a core feature, right? Today, the hour of the need is somebody stuck at the hospital and saying, how much are you approving? How much do I need to pay out of my pocket? That's a fundamental question everybody has, right? I'm still focused on solving that one problem. Then we will go into the next higher order problems. I mean, at least that's how we have defined the internal roadmap, right? There's no right or wrong. Every company has to make a decision, right? And I unfortunately don't have any product managers on my team also, which is the problem. Sorry. Like we talked about, don't make it complex for entry-level user. Please don't ignore the repeat user, because repeat users are there because they love your product. They have built certain easy shortcuts to work with the product. There's a certain bonding. Don't keep breaking it, right, for the advanced user. Don't spring surprises on your own team. Don't assume software is easy to manage. But the title of the talk at least were more the trade-offs, right? I mean, I did have 2 or 3 slides where at least I thought at least how we have managed some of the trade-off decisions, right? Again, no right or wrong. It's very contextual. It is subject to Satish being there, right? If it is not, then it is some other decision, right? So let me just quickly see how many slides are there because we're running out of time. 1, 2, 3. I've got only 4, right? I think the question was more about, do you add a feature or do you continue to invest in building a platform? Since there is no right answer, at least the way we've started thinking about software and building software is, there is at the end of the day, there is an end-to-end scenario in every business, right? An order to cash, the equivalent process exists in every business. From the time you identify a prospective customer till money hits everybody's bank is a process. You can call it by whatever name you want, right? In the ticketing it will be different, in e-commerce it will be different, in a marketplace it will be different. But at the end of the day, from an experience perspective, from the time you identify a prospective customer or now these days seller because you have a marketplace, till a transaction gets done, concluded and money hits the bank and everybody is happy. It includes income tax to the government also, right? Not just the consumer, right? We now fundamentally take the approach that when we start building the initial architecture, it is always ensuring that there is a dry run of the end-to-end available. I don't know how much depth I can go into each of these pockets, but fundamentally you play out your end-to-end scenario, which means when you identify a customer, how will the customer talk to you? How will the customer prospect become a customer? What channels are available? How will they come in? How will you reach out? How will you send communication? How do they find the catalog? How do they create a transaction? During the transaction, what are the possible life cycle states? You may not have implemented any of those, but you've actually thought about it, left enough placeholders, and then you went about choosing which ones you wanted to implement first, right? I didn't just create a website, right? You can just create a website and say, come book an order. Then somebody is there, standing behind, making it quickly and running to the next door pharmacy, right, to buy a medicine. That will work initially. You can take those calls saying, behind my website, it is an army of people. You can take the call as long as you've thought about it. Not because you didn't think about it and you had to put 100 people there. Not actually having that part of the thing sorted out is also a decision. It can't be by choice. This can't be like by chance or like by a random thing, right? So it does not mean that you don't go into the depth, but depth comes at a cost, right? You slowly go from initial to self-help to experience, right? In depth, I can build a website where I can keep focusing on the search results page all the time, ignoring my payment, ignoring the communication that happens after the transaction happens, ignoring the ability to do self-help, right? So I'm going deeper and deeper and deeper into optimizing search results because in my head I've decided that if it comes fast, conversion will be higher, right? But the customer is not only searching, right? Finally he has to travel. If nobody has to figure out the experience part of that and you kept investing only in one side, it's not going to be a great experience because you won't have repeat customers. And in a typical e-commerce world, unfortunately, while repeat is a number that everybody tracks, honestly, you're only spending your money in buying customers, right? Most of that is on the acquisition side. But while the conversion is at a transaction level, for somebody to come back to you and continue to stay engaged, everything else other than the website is important. Because website on which you bought the first ticket is not going to help you stay connected with the rest, right? So it is, when I say breadth, it is about mapping out what is the life cycle of my customer. Entry points, where do they stay, what do they do, what are the touch points, and then you choose which features you want to invest in. Sorry.
What is the average life cycle of a customer?
It depends.
Insurance will be like, I see in US it's around 2.5 to 3 years within a single insurance company, earlier with the private insurances. So in India, is it like the customer sticks on to the same insurance for 3 years or 4 years? Is there a number like that?
See that again depends on the way the framework works, right? Let's say you bought a retail insurance policy. That's it. If you continue to be my customer for more than 2 years, then all your pre-existing diseases are covered. Let's say that's a clause. So you will stay. It's not about a serve. So, it all depends on, some of those frameworks, right? What I'm talking about a repeat and stay engaged is, if the customer had a choice to do a similar transaction again, would he come back to you or would he go to someone else? Let me put it that way. I bought my first mobile phone on Amazon. Would I go back to Amazon or would I look for alternatives? Is Amazon my first recall? Maybe there's a Flipkart that is giving it $100 less, but I may still choose saying, well, last time I had a good experience, no issues, so it's fine. Then I'm writing off the value of the 100, right? There is 100 rupees there. And not every customer is coming back to a Flipkart or Amazon is coming for cheap price. It is not. It can never be. Right? It's like what happened in telecom, right? Beyond a point, if all the guys are dropping calls, then you will go to the cheapest guy. If your life depends on being on phone, if the guy is continuously dropping calls but it is at a cheap rate, would you stay? So you have to define the context, right? What is important to the guy? Right? If you're the kind of guy who's just buying a burner phone, making one kidnap call, then call drops is not exactly the biggest of the problems, right? But if you're a business guy who's always on a conference call and always on the move, staying connected and staying, without call drops, then becomes too important to you. So if you have not understood your consumer segments, then you can't make those decisions. And in all the consumer segments also, there will be some you will be partial towards because you can't satisfy all the segments. The feature decision goes saying, are there gaps in my overall experience? Then within each experience, is there something that I can improve? Or is there something new that I can do to eliminate a lot of the manual stuff? Or is there a consumer segment that I want to disproportionately, be partial towards in creating a much better experience? And these are all decisions, guys. Nothing is automatic. And our job, including me into this group, is to make decisions. It does not look like, because other people will hate you saying I make decisions, right? You can't say that. But it is about making decisions. Every decision you make has an impact on how the product evolves, how the company services its customer, and where the revenue actually gets spent as a cost. It's a decision, right? Look at it this way, right? I answer 150,000 calls a month. Each call lasts for 5 to 6 minutes and it's a toll-free number. Every 2 minutes is 1 rupee 20 paisa. So you can do the math, right? Now, should I go and solve that problem? Is cost my inbound problem? Or should I first go back and figure out why are the customers having to call me? Even today, 40% of my incoming calls are for claim status. On the one hand, I'm building technology, right? But 40% of my incoming calls are still claim status. So which means there is still a segment of customers I have not understood. Maybe mobile is not the right thing to do. Maybe there is something else that I have to do for these people, right? So if you're not looking at the data, if you're not mapped out the experience and figured out gaps, you will never make the right decision, right? So in general, my rule of thumb is the following. If you walk to me and said, I want this by tomorrow, here is the triage that I would do as an engineering guy, not the product guy. If your feature is going to go bad and it does not mess with the rest of the system and I can turn it off, by all means I'll humor you. I will change red to green by tomorrow, no issues, right? But if a feature is required, I don't have the ability to change the platform, but I have a mechanism by which when I change this will not get disrupted or I can upgrade to the solid state, then I will say I can't do it tomorrow, I'll give you in a week's time. Because I won't do the full backend change, but I will do enough hooks to make sure that I isolate this feature from the rest. When you come back and say, I want to now build personalization across the platform, I want it by tomorrow, I'm saying, sorry, you will have to take a walk, right? Because this is a fundamental architecture change. And by doing this overnight, I'm creating a disaster for years to come. But this has to be a meaningful conversation. It is not about, I don't feel like working with you, right? So, but this is my rule of thumb for features in terms of what I do fast versus, what I would go do in terms of a breadth versus a depth, right? Again, yeah.
When you said that whenever there is a workaround possible, you do it just so that the rest of the system doesn't get impacted. Workaround also would not be able to scale over a period.
Agree. So you have to have a time frame.
So what do
Agree.
So how do you ensure that that doesn't come up? I mean, the ideal way forward would be to take it years slow, every time. But that doesn't help because of business goals that are coming. So, and putting too many managers also creates a problem. So how does a product manager ensure that not too many managers are coming into the product who have an issue down the line?
See, that is where you need, if all the people in the team are aligned, if engineering has been transparent, saying this is a band-aid problem, this is a right bandage problem, right? You need to know, and you need to have that trust, where it's an informed decision, right? But often when you build a workaround hoping that it will go away, Murphy's law says that it will stay, right? It will stay. But that is where then the specific skill set of your engineering comes into picture, right? At some point it will become, from a product management realm, it will become an engineering problem. So it is important that that engineering decision is made by a person who is competent and you are able to bake that into your product plan. You can't do that on your own. That's the biggest challenge, right?
At some point of time, that band-aid should get replaced.
It does, because every company will get into that firefighting mode. Unfortunately, like I said, if you're not disciplined about your feature set, if you're always creating a glut of features, you're not going back and fixing, if you're not allocated saying 70%, 30% or 60-40,
There is another
then there'll be lots of band-aids.
what's work, don't touch what's already working.
Sure, then why do we upgrade from Maruti 800 and Ambassador? Then why do we ever change Ambassador cars, right? I mean, you don't have to change the Ambassador car. And remember that scooter where you have to tilt and kick? No, the point is our needs also evolve, right? Our needs also evolve. Our customers' needs also evolve. So there's simply no choice but to respond. Because if you don't, somebody else will. I mean, I can be a number one today. But so was a Nokia, so was a BlackBerry, so was an Ambassador, so was a Bajaj, Chetak, I mean, right? But they are not there today. Because BlackBerry was the undisputed leader when optimizing data and the call cost was the single biggest problem that everybody was solving. The moment data got democratized and became cheaper, there were enough other alternatives, right? So it is, unfortunately, life is not so simple that we can decide saying standard operating procedure. Today I will do 1, 2, 3, 4, there's a decision chart, right? Every day in the morning you wake up, you get a different impetus from the market, from your customer. You have to, unfortunately, all of this you have to take with loads of salt and put your own business dynamic context on it, right? It is fundamentally a decision making progress, right? It is largely an individual subjective thing. But the more you are aligned towards getting everybody aligned, get them to do half the thinking for you, then you can actually make better decisions.
What do you usually do is whenever you define the feature stack plan or a roadmap decision, you figure that for every sprint or every release, you're going to keep around 20% or 40% reserved for tech tests. Is that how you?
No, I would just say today where am I standing, what are the most valuable things that I can do, and what are the biggest pain points that I have. And if it means that there is a feature that has to be dedicated only to fixing, you fix your dedicated feature only to fixing. In the initial days at Redbus, I would go back and tell the business, next 3 weeks ain't doing anything, not doing anything. Because this is the accumulation, these are the escalations, this is the dissatisfaction. I can keep doing, but it's too much of a conflict. I can't manage so many things in parallel. So in the first year, I took at least 3 or 4 holidays from features. I'm not saying that everybody should do, but that's one mechanism where I went back and said, here are the 10 things that I want to fix. I'm committing that on the 11th day, these will cease to be problems. But I had to do that as an engineering guy. That was my responsibility. See, it's team guys, right? If everybody else is doing that half the thinking for you, then you can do something more useful with your time, right? And on the consumer versus ops, at least this has been my personal experience, is that often we are building this fancy website where the customer comes, slides, transitions, material designs, colors, everything we do, but the call center guy is scratching his head when the call comes in saying because he can't see the auto status, because it is there only on the website. And how do I go to the website? I'm the call center guy, I can't go to the website, right? Only the consumer can go to the website. So often, in most product startups, especially the transaction intensive startups, we ignore the internal stakeholder completely. Finance is an afterthought. Ops is an afterthought. Call center is an afterthought, despite they being your most of the important touch points, either to the consumer or the regulator. It does not mean that you stop building the product and build internal applications, right? But if you have not thought about it, you can't retrofit, right? The fundamental taxation, right? The fundamental what goes into which ledger in accounting, some of these you should have at least thought about it. So something now I start doing is, so we've done this at least in the new hospital interface that we've launched. Whatever hospital sees, my operations team, when they log in, they see what the hospital sees today. They're not seeing the same data, they're seeing the same thing. There's no difference. And for me, incrementally, it was like this much of a delta cost to just enable an ops login with a read-only version. Otherwise, when the hospital calls and says, I'm seeing this status on my screen at the far right corner, and says, sir, screenshot bhejo, right? And then it goes into a 24-hour cycle or a 36-hour cycle to resolve. Now, my ops person logs in using his internal single sign-on account, chooses the hospital from the drop-down, he sees what the hospital is seeing. So it's basically dramatically cut down because most of the time the issue comes because you built a different power user interface for ops and a different simplified consumer interface for the consumer. Internally, your workflow will have 100 statuses. You simplified it to 3 for your customer. Customer always is in process, right? But that in process could be there are 100 people who failed on doing their job and you would never know. So sometimes oversimplification is also a problem, right? Personally, I believe that it is more valuable. If your customer and the ops person saw the same thing, then how can you ever give a wrong status? You can't give a wrong status, right? It comes at a cost, right? Because you'll get exposed if you're not honest in your internal workflow. But the best way to assure customer is when he sends a screenshot, you send the same screenshot saying this is what I'm seeing. And there's no difference, right? Otherwise, in the business I'm in, if I keep showing in process, my customer will come back and say, you guys are hiding something. If a claim got delayed by 20 days, maybe it was a fraudulent claim. Maybe somebody suspected it to be a fraudulent claim. Maybe I've sent it to investigation. I'm showing in process to the corporate decision maker. He says, how can this be in process? You guys are doing something, right? Then he sees one claim that he can't explain. He assumes that all other claims are a problem. Right? Fundamentally, that's like trust thing is broken, right? So something that we found easy to do was to just same thing, right? Everybody sees the same thing, nobody sees anything different, and everybody sees real time. There's nobody more advanced than the other, right? Yeah, sir.
The data, what you see, like how beneficial is it for your organization? Do you look onto those data and reduce the turnaround time for your claim processing, or how is it beneficial?
No. So, like I said, the first, I will only take 5 minutes more, right?
So,
Yeah.
can you get a Q&A approach a little better?
Sure.
We can get the flow right.
Sure, no problem. But like I said, I'm very clear. Transparency, self-help, experience. And then what I can do with, that's a parallel activity, right? Looking at the data. Right now we're only focused on building transparency. And I will stay focused on that problem until I'm convinced that I have given enough avenues for my customer where they don't have to call me for anything. Because if I have not solved that problem, everything else is an advanced use case, right? In-house versus outsource. I know as a product manager, you think I go to Capgemini, get 50 people, get this built out tomorrow, right? But, Capgemini, KPMG, it doesn't matter, whoever it is, TCS, Wipro, Infosys. By all means, you can outsource or you can do in-house. Fundamentally, in-house is always easier because you see people, you talk to people. Because so far, everything that we discussed over the last 90 minutes is about people only, right? It has not been about the product, right? It is about the people. But outsource, but don't, if you don't know what you don't want, what you want, right? You can't then walk to the developer and say change karo, then he'll send you a change request, it'll go through workflow status, then it'll cost you $100,000 extra, right? It is not the cost. You have no visibility into what impact it has from an engineering perspective. You only know from a product perspective. Product is it's like a bottoms up summing of engineering effort, ops effort and everything else, right? You have no visibility into that subsystem. What impact it has, what future plans it will derail, what impact it has in architecture. Are they making a wrong decision simply because you're pushing them to release a feature? You would not know, right? No engineering guy worth his salt will come and write it and saying, I am taking a suboptimal design decision so that I can deliver this feature, right? Nobody is going to tell you that. But you don't have a way to ask, right? And that's where it's a very important thing for you to be able to interact with people and then have conversations. Otherwise, you would not know half the things that are happening in the rest of the world. And when you outsource, the fundamental, I think, rule is you take ownership for the delivery, not the outsource agency. It is still your ownership. You are the one who's delivering. And if you have not figured out that mechanism by which you have an engagement with the outsource agency, you get enough visibility into how it is working. If you have not seen a weekly demo of whatever it is, they would have added only a button. But if you have not satisfied yourself that week on week you are on track, at the end of 6 months you are going to be terribly off track, right? The ownership is still with you and not with the outsource agency. Many of the outsource projects fail because you transferred ownership. Saying, I will evaluate you based on the outcome. You won't pay if the outcome is bad. Yes, I agree, but you lost 6 months. Actually, it's in your own interest to, if required, pay 10% more and get that done on time because the opportunity cost is much more. Right? So don't let go of the ownership, right, of delivery. And the third, even if you have taken ownership, if you have asked somebody to build, let's say your engineering team does not have the bandwidth to build an app, right, or to build a new service layer on top of the old service layer. You got this awesome engineering team outside and then outsource that activity. But if you have not already talked to your engineering guy and said, I'm going to bring this back into the system someday, and it can't come as a rude surprise to the guy. Somebody should have thought about it. Is like the prefab model now, right? When you build a flyover, you can do the prefabrication somewhere else and bring them and assemble. But the guy who's assembling needs to know whether it is being done there or whether it is being brought from somewhere else. If it is being brought from somewhere else, he will have his own spec that says, I expect the incoming piece to have the following attributes or characteristics or follow the checklist, right? So never build something outside that you can't come back and integrate, right? Otherwise, we'll be like 10 years ago when Oracle bought all the companies in the country and then Fusion, right? There was a middleware that nobody knew, right? Because then it becomes unmanageably complex. HR system will not talk to finance, will not talk to operations, will not talk to call center because these are all independent systems. Everybody is super achieved, local maximum, whatever, right? You know the problem. So I think that's, by all means, you should do outsourcing provided you are able to solve these three problems. At least in my, it's not the cost alone. Because there's a lot of hidden cost that comes if you have not solved these problems, right? And unfortunately, I ended up shutting down every project that was done by somebody else outside. Not because we are fanatic about building in-house, but because we failed on one of those three. Either we've asked them for the wrong thing, or we thought it was somebody else's ownership, and then what came out was what we needed. And finally, when it came, we didn't know what to do with it, right? So, and these were the three reasons why we ended up shutting down most of the outsourced projects. Took a lot of hits. But if you don't take that call, it's even worse. So this is the last, right? This is the most difficult because everybody loves great user experience, right? Everybody loves UI. Everybody loves, awesome user experience. But again, going back to my example, I can give the most beautiful app to my customer, continue to show in process for the next 24 hours, right? As a claim status. Or I can first solve the problem of how do I give him the right status and then pick how nicely this is built, right? And it's a choice. And unlike a lot of the other things, this also ties into core, I think, the brand philosophy, right? You can't keep deviating from it. Like a ClearTrip, for example. When you go to ClearTrip, you will not expect a bad user interface. You're not prepared to encounter bad interface, right? Never. Why is that? Because that's the association that you have with ClearTrip, right? I think, and that's now part of their core value proposition. Otherwise, why would I go to ClearTrip if then when there is a Make My Trip, when there is a Yatra, and when even IRCTC is selling flight tickets? I still go to ClearTrip because somewhere it rhymes well with how I think about a product, right? And there is a consistency and there is a guarantee of consistency. And today, if you have created 4 screens and one screen has this awesome user experience, slides and transition, one has only text, one looks like the old IRCTC QuickBook form, clearly your user is going to be confused. And these again depend on your consumer segment, what's important to them, whether you have reached that level in the industry where sophistication is more important than functionality, like iPhone 1, right? iPhone 1 created a market where people didn't care about a feature. It's not like you could make calls, it's not like you could send messages, right? But still love the product, right? And iPhone said, this is my core proposition to you. And there's not a single iPhone version that has deviated from the core proposition. Until iPhone 1, you couldn't even do multitasking, right? Today you switch from one window to the other. How many years it took for you to do that on iPhone? Many years, right? If you're doing a call, you couldn't go somewhere else. If you're doing something else, you couldn't do something else. If you switched tabs, you lost the context. But it still had the fan following it had. Because you have defined what target segment you're going after, you defined how you will service, and you define your core value proposition, and you stay true to that core value proposition. Do you, like in iPhone, expect any app to have a bad UI? Even once? So they invest significant amount of money in validating every app to make sure that everything that goes into the app store also conforms to that, right? So it's a decision. You can go from bad to good, but you can't keep going from good to bad all the time in a rush to deliver features. So if you have decided that your form and the user experience is core to the way your product is positioned, please stay true to it. Don't take shortcuts because it will confuse a lot of your customers, right? And your decision making needs to reflect what's important to your customer, not what is important to your backlog, right? It is very, very, very important. And fundamentally, I think some of these problems can be brought down in terms of the magnitude if you have actually simplified the feature set and didn't actually overwhelm them with 1,000 features, because you yourself don't know how these 1,000 features interact, right, with each other anymore. So there was an interesting video where the guys who done the top10.com, they also did this hotel search engine, right? Before they built that thing, they went and looked at most of the hotel search engines in the world. That guy made a list of all the filters, right? And then it was basically like this length of a wall, right? And as many filters, price, rooms, beds, attached, detached, bathroom, right? Everything is a filter. Then they said, we will build one more hotel search engine which is simple. So then they went back, consolidated across all the hotel search engines. There were like some 17 or 20 odd filters that they found. Then they went back, talked to the feature. They identified this, and these are the 4 things that I will always need irrespective of what else is needed. Then they actually went back and built the user experience. I'm saying this is the most obvious part, and everything else is like built around it in terms of very simple navigation, right? So often just feature after feature after feature, like the old SAP menus and everything else, right? Beyond a point it becomes unmanageable. And then suddenly you will need all your users to be advanced users, right? For you, because you see, live, breathe that product 24/7, for you it's very easy. You go to the other side and become a customer, and you can make head or tail out of it, right? So simplify the feature set and then make what is most critical, right? If you actually simplify the core feature set and core navigation, you don't even have to make some of those decisions, because it's not interfering with your core user experience, right? So which basically, brings us to the point that it's all about people. It's all about understanding your customer. It's about making decisions brutally, ruthlessly, every minute. Decide, what do I want to do with this 1 minute that I have at my disposal? Am I building the most valuable thing? Or am I creating something that nobody needs and nobody wants? In that process, am I creating an unsustainable organization which will anyway fail because your service delivery is not going to match the expectations of the product? Like a great looking product but does not start, right? It does not work. And you can't then say, customers coming and say, my car is not starting, then you can't say, sir, I'll give you free leather seats, right? Clearly, you expect him to stay longer in the car, but you can't give him a leather seats if fundamentally the issue is with the car moving. So you have to make, fortunately or unfortunately, I think our life is about making decisions. And everything is a trade-off. And by the way, we do this outside work every minute. If you decide on going on a holiday, you figured out how to set aside X rupees every month, right? Today, if you have a kid's school versus a holiday versus buying a new shirt versus I want to get a new EMI for my new XUV 500, we make these decisions every minute of our living life. Except when it comes to a customer and product, I know it, right? So I think that's the only problem, right? So, done. All right, sorry. So I think that's pretty much what I wanted to share.
Thanks. So thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
That was quite insight and
A lot of information. I think highly concentrated information, highly condensed and everything, so we'll take time to digest, most of us. And I request Chair. Yeah, it's there with me. I'll share. Pardon?
Yeah, sure.
We can do it offline after this session, okay? So I'll just request Chair of ICC, Sandeep Jain, to give the moment to the service.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity. It's like really exciting to
Satish, would you mind writing a mail ID so that anybody wants to connect with you? So
this is the written part of the exam.
do you mind that announcement for internship? And,
Yeah, I will do that. So if it's okay with you, I will take one more couple of minutes about what we do at MediAssist. So MediAssist is a healthcare services organization. It's a group of 3 companies. One is a third-party administrator, where we are a third-party administrator for health insurance. We're the largest in the country. We serve about 12 million lives on the corporate side and about 100 million lives on the government business side, right? And many of the top, let's say 16 of the top 20 IT companies in the country are our customers today. We're a very corporate-heavy, TPA. The second business we have is that we have a wellness, in a way, a marketplace of wellness. Like marketplace is the in thing, except nobody knows us as a marketplace. Having said that, we have a 5,000 hospital network, we have a 5,000 diagnostic center network, we have an OPD network, we have an inpatient network, we have a counseling network, right? There are tons of things that we do. And then we have a pharmacy benefits distribution business, where we have an entity that has its own pharmacy licenses in 18 cities with its own licenses and everything else, and does fulfillment for the corporate customers, right? So our objective has been to leverage technology to, one, improve operations efficiency. And what we've been doing on the wellness business, we are actually working on a real marketplace, right? So we're happy to absorb a couple of people from here, either as interns or as full-time product managers, right? And not because of this presentation, but I will, talk to you offline if there is interest in what are we trying to do. And it is not the fax machine management. It is a true marketplace because we are possibly the largest network in the country. Nobody knows about it because we've been a manual pen and paper company before. So if there's any interest, you can connect with me offline, either as an internship where we have a bunch of focused specific projects, either in defining the product or also a little bit extending into the marketing and the research side of it, or also as full-time product managers. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for this. So we're going to have a networking session outside, and tea counter is there. Please, let's join there. Thank you.